Good.
Hello, welcome back to the Sensorimotor podcast. I'm Matt Sloan from Sensory Fitness.
And my name's Mr. Alex from Sensory Digest.
Okay, so today we're talking about impulsivity. I almost forgot what we're talking about. Impulsivity. What is it? What does it mean? What does it look like? And what can you do about it at home, at school, wherever? So, impulsivity. What is, when we say the word impulsivity, what does that mean to you?
Kind of lunging forward, always needing to kind of be first at things. So it's that dysregulated alert state where you're on that fight or flight type response where you're just wanting to act before thinking. So the nervous system's dysregulated, and a lot of times the child is up on their toes or like leaning forward in some fashion, and just going off instinct. It's more of like a primal instinct versus thinking it through. So that's how I classify impulsivity.
So you said having kind of a decrease of safety awareness. These are the kids that are up and they're out. They're impulsive, right? They don't think before they act. They're fast. They elope. They take off. They're in that fight or flight zone quite often. And yeah, it's in school. These are the kids that are, to me, are pretty obvious, right? These are by the red flags. These are the ones, the squeaky wheels. They get the grease. At home, they're doing things that you don't want them to do quite often. And how many times? Why did you do that? Why didn't you think about that? Like I say to my own kids. Kids in general, I feel like, are impulsive. That's part of the development. It's these kids that are chronically just, when we say impulsive, they take it up a couple of notches, and they're chronically kind of in that state quite a bit. So, we say impulsivity. What are some reasons a kid maybe has impulsivity quite often?
A lot of times it can be just a lack of movement or input, or the intensity of the input that they get throughout the day doesn't meet their threshold. So a lot of times we have kids that have very high thresholds for movement and resistive work. So that could be one. Another thing could be nutrition. Another part could just be genetics, and a huge factor is the environment that they're in on a daily basis at home and at school and out in the community.
So maybe they're not that high arousal state often. So a lot of the input that they're getting puts them in a high arousal state, so they're not able to process that input. Maybe it's auditory, maybe it's too loud, maybe it's the bus ride on the way to school, it's too bouncy. That movement, it puts them in a high arousal state. Maybe it's the clothes that they're wearing, they just can't process that input. So it brings their alertness level a couple notches higher than where it would be. And that's difficult. That makes things hard. Makes it hard to concentrate, hard to focus. So they're very impulsive, perhaps.
A lot of times you'll see the kids are fidgeting in their chair a lot, and they're constantly moving around. It's because one thing is, a lot of times impulsivity can be stemmed from the core, because the core is never stabilized. And a lot of times I see is the child didn't hold like a flexion position as an infant. Basically, they weren't laying on their back and rolling with their knees tucked in and feel comfortable breastfeeding. Like, breastfeeding is a huge part of development, and getting into that calm flexion state is hard for them, because they're constantly using their extensor tone, which is their back muscles, posterior chain on the backside, and they're always in this startle response. And when you're in that, fight, flight, or freeze state, you're going to be a lot more impulsive. So as therapists, we're doing a lot of core exercises to help with that core stability, so they can sit still for longer and focus for longer.
So you mentioned body posture. So is that something I might look for? Like, if a kid is constantly being impulsive, is that something I might want to look for? Their body position, kind of that T-Rex, a raptor kind of pose, where out.
They're either in their extensor state or they're leaning forward in like a lunging state. So they're up on their tiptoes and they're leaning forward trying to grab stuff. So it could be either posture, but it's not a good posture. It's not a neutral posture, you could say. What you're looking for.
So toe walking, so kind of that extension, all these muscles in the back of my neck that extend me, bring me out, as well as maybe some toe walking, or kind of that lunging, like ready to go position.
So a lot of times we see kids that are W sitters. They have low muscle tone, and a lot of time when you have low muscle tone, you use your extensor tone. So it's like you collapse in. So you don't have the core strength in the flexion posture, but you use your extensor tone. Basically, you lock out your joints, your back muscles, your neck muscle, your hips, your ankles, and basically you lock out that W sitting posture throughout the day, and you get in this hyper-focused alert state with Legos, reading, even though I love reading, think it's great for knowledge, but they're doing it excessively and doing minimal movement. So sometimes if you get so absorbed into a sedentary lifestyle and you don't get that large motor movement processing, that's where we're seeing the impulsivity, because they're not getting that input that they need to multisensory process.
Okay, so before we were talking about high arousal, now you're kind of talking about kids in that low alert state. So for instance, my son, he loves to read. He's 8 years old. It's all he does. He'll sit and he'll read forever. What happens is I ask him to close the book because it's time for dinner or we're going somewhere. I got to close that book. His alert level's down here. Now suddenly the book is closed. We're back in the world, and he's bothering his brother. He's screaming at the top of his lungs. It's annoying, and that looks to me like impulsivity. What we're looking at is kind of a disconnect from our mind, from our body, and suddenly we've gone from this very visual world. You'll see that a lot, kids with screens or tablets, or like Mr. Alex said, Legos and things that are very visual. They're that eye candy. They're just here. Everything's in front of them. As soon as that's taken away, we're thrust back into the physical world, and that's dysregulating. That's uncomfortable. And so kids kind of boom. You'll see them pop up, and then you'll see that impulsivity stuff, that the loud yelling, the fast movements. If you're at the grocery store, kids are knocking all the stuff off the counter. For my son anyway. So a lot of times you're looking at high arousal, low arousal, all going from 0 to 60. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so they're ping-ponging back and forth in arousal. Sometimes it's just high arousal all day and then drop down to an emotional meltdown at night because they've been holding it together all day at school. And they either go meltdown or they go super hyperactive at night and get super impulsive, lose their body. So a lot of times these kids they can be, when you're over visual, you're usually in your brain. So like you're in your head and you're thinking too much and perseverating on thoughts too much, and you're not in the moment and you're not internalizing basic sensations of sensory.
Yeah. And something else you mentioned before, you mentioned posture. So I'm going to go back to that because we talked about arousal level, high arousal, low arousal, and how that can be difficult because kids have trouble regulating themselves, and so they become impulsive. I feel like a lot of times the kids with difficulty with that posture, that weak core, W sitting, their kind of trunk control is difficult. What do? Sitting still, paying attention is difficult because that takes the trunk of the tree needs to be solid in order for the trees for the branches and the leaves to get sun, right? But if that core is very weak, kids are gonna move and they wiggle and they're up and they're out. And to me, sometimes that's mislabeled as impulsivity, but really all that kid's trying to do is stay in a position. It's hard to keep my posture if I have a weak core, and it's hard to be static. It's hard to stay still. I need to be dynamic to move. That's much easier. If I'm moving quickly, then I don't have to engage my core. It's a lot easier for me to kind of move than sit still. And then the moving kids are the kids that, once I'm moving, maybe that cranks it up a notch, or it's disruptive, or they get up out of their seats, and it goes on from there.
So a lot of times the kids are like moving as a compensation technique to stabilize their core, or the other thing is they can also lock out by majority of the time they're leaning against the desk, legs tucked it back behind the chair, and they're using their extensor tone to lock out against the desk or just not use their core. But like as adults, a lot of times what we're doing is we start moving around to help upregulate us because we're usually really lethargic, and we drink coffee to help increase our alert state. And
yes,
then
lots of coffee.
In lots of coffee. And we move our body or bounce on a therapy
Rex.
ball makes a huge difference.
We get a dog.
Yeah.
Helps us calm down, right? Here's Rex. He wants to say hi.
So what we do is, like with Matt sitting on the therapy ball, he can do rhythmic bouncing to help increase his alert state. Because usually adults, so they're more lethargic, where a lot of the children we see, they're either high alert and they're really hyperactive, impulsive, but also they have those times where they go really low. But as adults, we have a lot of coping skills in order to kind of stay regulated. Coffee is the number one coping skill for most adults. And then a lot of adults know that exercise is medicine, and they do some exercise, 1 to 2 times a day, or they get their body moving outside, take a walk on lunch break, and that makes them their whole day better.
They're giving themselves a sensory diet. We all do it as adults, and we know pretty much aware of it. And we expect kids to not do that. We take a lot of movement away from kids. That's a whole different. I think we could dedicate a whole thing about movement
For sure.
For kids and how important movement is. But everything Alex and I are talking is movement based. But so anyway, so looking at impulsivity, some reasons why it happens having to do with the arousal level, having to do with postural stability. So what can we do about that? Let's say I'm a parent or I'm a teacher and I see these behaviors, I see this impulsiveness. What can I do about it?
Well, we first want to try to look at, there's Go Noodle and stuff like that. Those are like great applications for like visual type gross motor activities. They're motivating. The thing I really like about them is that a lot of them incorporate auditory with motor movement. So it's like dancing with rhythm. And rhythm is regulation. The thing what we can do is add to that is we can do add some type of weight to it. It could be pulsers. You could check out WEC method pulsers. But any type of resistive input, it could be body weight exercises into your classroom routine. Make it fun. Use weighted medicine balls, the soft squishy ones. Do some water jugs. Fill up or have some water jugs they can move around. Heavy books inside crates. Also laundry baskets with ropes on them so they can pull stuff down the hallways if they need to.
So everything you're talking about is, you heard the term heavy work, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, resistive input.
Yeah, so moving weight, so picking a dead weight up and moving it, like books or chairs or something resistive, body weight, where I got animal crawls. So if I'm a teacher and I'm giving, so here's an example. So I was a teacher a long time ago, and I would give my kids movement breaks. My movement break would be to send my kids down to the gym, play basketball, come back. A lot of times that backfired on me, and I never knew. I understood the theory of movement breaks. Hey, they're getting movement, but it's a lot different between going to a gym and shooting hoops and picking something heavy up and moving it, right? So when I'm in a gym, it's loud, it's echoey. I don't really have a connection to things. I'm throwing a ball, and which takes coordination, and I'm not really getting a lot of input. I'm using more of my limbs. I'm kind of going outside in, as opposed to me when I pick up heavy weight. I'm using my entire body. I'm getting that resistive feedback. That helps me get a bit more grounded. When I'm again in the gym, it's a little bit different. So I didn't realize that. When I started to incorporate boxing, that was a little different. I would do boxing with some of my students in the beginning of class. And I worked in an alternative school, that's a whole story, but so I could do things other schools couldn't do, like boxing. But I wasn't, they were hitting the pads and hitting the bag, and that's a lot more feedback. That's a lot more resistive and a lot more heavy work based. Plus I'm doing some more bilateral coordination, which is awesome. So being intentional about that movement. So it's not just about sending a kid out in the hallway to walk around the hallway then come back. Sometimes that's not enough. Maybe the kid walks around the hallway with a heavy vest on or some compression clothing. I was talking about this in my blog as well. So I coach soccer. My son's in soccer. I see it a lot. Soccer is one of those sports, just like basketball, where it's open field and you have to have a ball and there's kids running around and it's kind of loud and there's a lot to see. And when it's time to run laps, some of my kids would just kind of melt down or run into other kids or take off. I saw a lot of impulsivity, and it got dinged as behavior. And it's one of those sports where I'm not getting a lot of body feedback. Yes, I'm running and I'm getting contact with the ground, but it's much different than if I was to do something like wrestling or jiu-jitsu or judo or horseback riding, swimming, gymnastics. These kinds of sports that incorporate whole trunk rotation, whole body movements, as opposed to like coordinating my limbs to catch, throw, kick, track a ball, and work as a team. It's a bit different. And I find those activities really, really useful as far as getting kids more body input to help with that impulsivity.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, a lot of times you have to master not necessarily master, but be able to do large motor movements such as like tumbling and moving your body on the ground, non-suspended activities, in order to get large coordinated movements with, say, balls, football, baseball, basketball. Those are great, but you're going to get a lot better body awareness and scheme. It's basically like when you're infant, you're doing a lot of rolling on the ground. You're just constantly climbing over things. Your body's just more primal. You'll see a lot of natural movement type fitness programs nowadays for adults where they're just getting back to the crawling movements, climbing, rolling, and we're just being more intentional for the therapeutic use as pediatric OTs and CODAs. So we also look at the deep pressure aspect. A lot of times, impulsivity, your nervous system's kind of running, I like to say, rampant and dysregulated, and by compressing it through deep pressure, it could be either lycra or a weighted blanket, all different types of weighted items to help compress the nervous system. That can slow down the nervous system, decrease the impulsivity and possible anxiety. So they kind of sometimes go hand in hand. So I use lots of deep pressure with resistive work. And then the last thing would be the vestibular, which is what we talk about, the central nervous system, the bottom of the pyramid. And by strengthening the vestibular system, which is changing your head in different planes of gravity and space, so your orientation in space. Basically, we got swinging, rolling, tumbling, jumping and crashing, moving that head versus just being in a static posture. Writing or typing on a computer all day, you're getting very, very little vestibular stimulation. It's when your head moves in a quick motion, that's when you get those fluid in the crystals in the inner ear to balance out. So for kids that are, usually the kids that are impulsive are usually, not all the time, they're seeking input to help self-regulate. So by doing vestibular exercises, either suspended or non-suspended, it can help regulate their arousal state to decrease their impulsivity.
So everything Alex is talking about is movement-based. So getting that heavy work in, moving the head, incorporating some tactile stuff. A lot of times what you're doing, case in point, he needs to move around. So a lot of times what we're doing is we're just building bodies. We're giving body awareness. A kid that doesn't have body awareness, it's very uncomfortable. It's very dysregulating. When I pick up something heavy or I'm on a swing, that gives me some body input and lets me know where my body is in space, and that's very calming. That's very organizing. When I don't have awareness of my body, I put it on par with driving in a car and you go down a hill real fast and you get weightlessness and you get that funny feeling in your stomach, like, oh, what's going on? I imagine that feeling is in our kiddos a lot of times during the day, or probably most of the day. And that's uncomfortable. That's dysregulating. Not knowing where I am in space, it's hard for me to focus. So when I pick up that heavy weight, when I get that movement on the swing, when I incorporate my big, gross body movements, and I'm building a body map, I'm building a body scheme. So getting all that input and letting me know where my body is in space and how the machine works, then I can help decrease that impulsivity. Then I can focus on something. I can focus on a task.
Okay, we're back. So with Mr. Matt talking about just body scheme and how to implement these large motor movements with this multi-sensory processing interventions you can do at home. I like to think of where kids usually hang out most is the family room, okay? Until they're like teenagers, they hang out in their bedroom, but before that, they're usually inside the living room. Younger kids don't usually go to the basement by themselves unless they're on a play date. And so utilize the living room for large motor movements. It's the kids' place at home, so you can use crash pads, beanbag chairs, even stuffed animals inside of a duvet cover to do crashing, rolling, putting it on their back, making a fort. There's a lot of different ways you can get in either movement or deep pressure relaxation, or a combination of both, depending on the child's sensory profile.
Yeah, I mean, so, couches. Everyone has a couch, or most people have a couch or a bed or something. Jumping off the armrest onto the couch, or my kids love forts like most kids do. We get the pillows out, and the kids gotta crawl into the couch pillows, and then Dad comes and collapses them. So they get the good big smush, and they gotta crawl out. Incorporating what you have around the house. Get that input that Mr. Alex was talking about, to get that deep pressure, to get that impact, to get that heavy work in a playful way. And it's a good activity. It's a good way to get it in the household. If you have a trampoline, that's awesome. If you can set up a swing in your house, even cooler. But you don't need to go out and buy the expensive equipment. That stuff helps. If you can do it, fantastic. If not, use what you have. Couch cushions. You have a trampoline. You have a bed with a box spring with that they can jump on. That kind of stuff. We talked about the big gross motor movements, and I feel like that's incredibly important. What also works is keeping busy hands. So some activities you can do to help with impulsivity is just keeping the hands busy. So like I mentioned before, my son reads a book, and when we're done, his alert level shoots up. My younger son, same thing when we watch a movie. As soon as the movie's off, boom, that eye candy's gone. He's bouncing off the couches, stuff like that. So what we started to do is giving him some putty to play with while he watches the movie. And he's got busy hands. It's giving a little bit more input. Or while my son, while we're sitting there reading books, I'll give him some putty or some kinetic sand to play with. And just making that body connection can help later, incorporating that movement throughout the day, that creating a sensory diet and a way for a kid to get some input while they do whatever to keep them kind of connected, and so they're not going from 0 to 60 when that activity is done.
A lot of times I'll use gum with my kids at home.
Gum, yeah.
As a way to get in some input. Also, it helps regulate their breathing, because a lot of times if you're going that's when you get really impulsive and lose your body. The other thing would be a lot of blowing and sucking activities using crazy cups.
So oral motor stuff.
Oral motor, so slowing down their breath, going from the chest breathing all the way down to the diaphragm.
We should totally do an oral motor this next week.
So
oral motor would be awesome.
So episode number 3, oral motor, just everything relating to it. And so anyways, lowering, when you get into that belly breathing, then we're going to decrease their impulsivity. And sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. But you can also, if you want to make it more powerful, we do oral motor with large motor movement. So we're getting the best of all the sensory systems.
Yeah. I mean, everything Alex and I were talking about, it's all movement. It's all movement based. We're being intentional about the specific movements. But, if you're having trouble with behavior, or you see a lot of impulsivity in your kid, I would step back and look at how much movement that your kid is actually getting throughout the day. In schools, we're not moving as much. PE is whittled down to probably 2 times a week. Most of them don't have art as much anymore. Music classes, they're not, and my kids, I know they're not really playing a lot. They're watching a lot of music videos and stuff like that in class. So that's all movement-based stuff, and it's not happening as much. Our kids these days just don't move as much as they should. Just the way society is set up. We can do a whole session on that. But take a look back at how much movement your kid is actually getting. If you think, when the time they get up, they eat breakfast, they get them off to school, they come home, maybe they're going right to their tablet, maybe they're going to their room, maybe they're just sitting on the couch, I don't know. But have a look. Are they getting enough movement throughout the day? And if I don't need to sit there and decipher, are they getting enough vestibular, are they getting enough proprioception, are they getting enough tactile? As a parent, just be aware of how much movement they're getting and try to incorporate that into their day as much as possible. So maybe when they come home, you play smoosh them with a pillow. Make sure they're getting outside enough. Go take them for hikes. Maybe not lock the door outside, but I do. I kick them out. Go outside, and they sit there and in the window. But it's not the best example, but making sure they get enough movement throughout the day. And if they're getting all that movement and they're still melting down, then look at the exact movement. Is it too much open stuff? Are they melting down on the soccer field? Are they melting down in the basketball court? Maybe maybe you do something else.
And also, when giving them that intense input, if they stay dysregulated and impulsive, also having some tools in your pocket to slow their nervous system down after they've got that large motor movement. So there's a lot of different ways we can do it. Check out.
Thanks everybody for tuning into the Sensorimotor podcast. If you have any insight or anything we want to talk about, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, please share. Check out sensoryfitness.org. Check out sensorydigest.com. Right?
Yeah.
Check it out. Spread the word. Have a great day. Thanks very much.
See you later.